Everest Live. It is August 3rd, about 9:15 p.m. Pakistan time. Today's updates around the Broad Peak Avalanche and recovery efforts. Basically, today was just another day of hard work for the teams up on the mountain, bringing bodies down to Camp 1. Seems like we've reached a point where they're now hoping for longline rescue from the Pakistani military to try to get the bodies down more safely than using human power. In Pakistan, longline rescues are much less common than they are in Nepal, as everything runs through the army, and the army pilots are much more risk averse. Also, not to mention just the process and procedures that go into that. So today, I wanted to spend a minute kind of doing a bit of review. I just thought it'd be useful for us to go over what we know. My sourcing for this are different reports from Explorers Web, Everest Chronicle, National Geographic, and then also my own sources of people who were on expeditions, on a Broad Peak expedition before the group that went up on the 29th, and then also climbers that are on K2 were on K2 when the accident happened. So take a step back. Broad Peak, what's going on? For those of you who aren't totally enmeshed in and haven't memorized all the details of all 14 8,000-meter peaks, Broad Peak is the 12th tallest mountain in the world, 8,051 meters above sea level. Broad Peak is kind of adjacent to, very, very close to K2. In between them, you have the Grumman-Austin Glacier. That's what separates the two mountains. The base camps are quite close together. And if you follow that glacier down, there's an area called Concordia, which is where the Grumman-Austin Glacier meets the Baltoro Glacier. It's called the throne room of the gods. Some say it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. But it is to say that Broad Peak, K2, the Karakorums, that zone is one of the most remote and most rugged in the Karakoram and, by definition, in the entire world. Broad Peak was first climbed in 1957 by a group of Austrians. And it's, as a peak, even though it's not extremely high, it's not as high as K2, 8,600 meters. The peak is known for having very high levels of objective danger, meaning rockfall, avalanches, and it being Broad Peak, reaching the actual summit is a long, long slog. So even though it's not an extreme altitude mountain, it's a mountain that does have its own challenges, and it has its own reputation for being quite deadly and quite dangerous. So in 2026, this year, let's kind of just give a quick summary of the season. There were a number of expeditions on the mountain. There was expeditions. There was sort of a first wave of expeditions. There was a team of kind of independent climbers that were going without oxygen, Klein and Overton. There was a Seven Summits group, a gentleman named Napier Fuller. They were all on the mountain kind of in the initial wave. They were just there to climb Broad Peak. Sources say that there wasn't a ton of expeditions on Broad Peak this year. People weren't using it to acclimatize for K2. It was just Broad Peak expeditions. And so the ropes went up, even though there was only like 3 or 4 climbers. They fixed the ropes to the summit. The ropes reached the summit on July 18th. One, the climber made it or was with the rope fixing group. Others were there that next morning on the 19th in that first round of ascents. As those people came back down, they reached base camp, and on July 21st, that was when NIMS summited G2, Gasherbrum 2, with no oxygen. That left NIMS with only Broad Peak and Choi Yu remaining to climb with no oxygen to secure his record of climbing all 14 8,000-meter peaks without oxygen twice. NIMS apparently made sort of a last-minute decision. It wasn't an original part of the plan, but let's go to Broad Peak. Let's get this summit as well while we're here to get him closer to the record. And so that's when NIMS's team made their way towards Broad Peak Base Camp. At Broad Peak Base Camp, in this second wave of climbers, there was NIMS and a team with Elite Expeditions. There was a team from Seven Summits with the Omani climber. And then Imagine Nepal also had a team there. They were all kind of coordinating, and they went up together. On July 22nd, it started to snow. I'm hearing varying reports. I haven't been able to confirm about how heavy that snow was. Was it just some kind of incidental snowstorms, or was it a big, heavy snowstorm? I think a lot of reporting has been assuming that it was very heavy snow because there was a massive avalanche a number of days later. I'm having trouble confirming that, and I will report back once I learn more about the actual weather conditions from people that were there. On the 25th, Klein and Overton, who failed to summit during that first summit wave, were waiting at Broad Peak Base Camp, hoping that the conditions would improve. They felt that there had been so much more additional snow, it wasn't safe, and they depart Broad Peak Base Camp on the 25th. And that's when NIMS and their team sort of moved over towards Broad Peak. On the 29th, the 10 climbers, which were the remaining climbers on Broad Peak approaching the end of the season, they decide to go up and make their bid for the summit. They climb up and they reach Camp 2 on July 29th. Early in the morning on July 30th, you can follow the GPS trackers at 5:33 a.m. NIMS's tracker, and this was also paralleled by the Omani climber. They were at 6,166 meters. By 7 a.m., they made 6,430 meters. They're proceeding upward at a decent pace. Just before 9 a.m., the last ping was about 6,600 meters. They were moving from the stretch between Camp 2 and Camp 3, which is crossing kind of a basin, an area that is a terrain trap for avalanches. And the last contact was made with the team around 9 a.m., according to reports from the Gilgit-Baltistan. So the last contact was had about 9 a.m. That is the time when the avalanche happened. That report of the avalanche, interestingly, was only registered at 8 or 9 p.m. that night. There was a gap of about 11 hours or more. That's one of the unanswered questions right now that we have about what went down. Why did it take so long for the avalanche to be registered? What went on there? Why weren't they checking in with the teams? These are questions that we don't have the answers to yet. So the avalanche happens, and then that night, basically everything swings into gear to coordinate a rescue effort the next morning. Next morning, on the 31st, the search begins, and relatively quickly, by that afternoon, they found the remains of 3 bodies. During that time as well, you'll remember there were drone searches that identified more bodies higher up. K2 expeditions were all canceled, and the climbers descended to go provide support for the rescue efforts on Broad Peak. On the 1st, that's when the ground search began, and teams went up the mountain. I think there were 8 climbers went up the mountain, and they were able to reach a zone where there were 5 climbers kind of in one general area. Those 5 climbers then were packaged, and the process of bringing them down to Camp 1 began. On the 1st, that was when Elite made the official announcement that NIMS had been confirmed dead. There was one other body that had been identified or had been seen from a drone, but it was in a location that was too difficult to access. There was also still one climber missing. So on the 2nd then, that was yesterday, that was a day just of body retrieval, of bringing the bodies down to Camp 1, which is an extremely difficult and dangerous process. They brought them down to Camp 1, where they are today. And unfortunately, the remains of the bodies of Nawang Tindu Sherpa and Sohil Sakai are still missing or have not been reached by rescuers. It's unclear if there will be further rescue efforts to recover them. As you can imagine, these are very risky and dangerous things. The last thing that we want would be to have more tragedies happen in the process of trying to rescue and recover these bodies. So that all remains to be seen, what will happen next. And so now we're here on August 3rd, waiting for the longline rescues. So that's what we know in terms of facts. The questions and the controversies, the things that we are going to be wrestling with and may never get good answers on. The big questions are going to be, why did the team go up? Did they believe that the conditions were good? What was behind that decision-making process? What led there to be 10 people in the line of fire at one time that created the scale of this tragedy? Other questions are, why did it take 11 hours or so for the rescue to be initiated on the day of the avalanche? Those, I think, are going to be the main questions. I guess the third aspect would be, what was going on with the GPS trackers? I think, there was a lot of speculation about how NIMS's tracker was kind of moving shortly after the avalanche. Was that a glitch in the tracking, or was that actual movement? These are questions that probably will be worried over and discussed extensively in the coming days and weeks. My advice or my perspective on it is that it's really important to remember, for those of us who are not on the mountain and who are far away, that the reality on the mountain is very, very different from the reality we experience at home. The effects of altitude, of hypoxia, of the strain, summit fever, the dynamics within the team, and also just some of the chaotic systems that make up mountains make it very, very difficult to have black or white explanations of things. Were the conditions safe or not safe? It's very difficult to have that be a binary truth. And in many, many cases, the decisions that were made by the group to continue on, to climb from Camp 2 to Camp 3, are decisions that will probably be with them for the rest of time. And we can only speculate. And oftentimes I feel that speculation only leads us to, it's kind of torture, right? There's a level of acceptance that needs to happen. And, to that point, there were some comments yesterday, too, that I really appreciated when yesterday I was talking about, what do we need to do to make this never happen again? There were some comments that were saying, of course, this is going to happen again. This is inherent in mountaineering. I was texting with some friends in the industry, and they were also saying, these kind of tragedies sometimes are the price you have to pay for the incredible, incredible moments we've had in the mountains and for everything that this industry is, for better and for worse. And I do want to, make sure that I acknowledge that point. And I guess for me to clarify what I felt or what I was trying to communicate is, of course, it's going to be impossible to take risk out of mountains, but I do feel it's worthwhile to strive to always make things safer. I think it's worthwhile to strive to reduce that risk so that more people can climb more mountains longer, so that there are fewer tragedies, there are fewer families of mountain workers that are left losing a loved one. And I know many people, I know most everyone in the industry also feels that way. So the days where we figure out how we do that, I think those are still to come. Thanks, everybody. We'll keep you posted as things go. I think as the recovery efforts are sort of now into some of the more material phases of it, our coverage also, I'll chime in when there's something important, relevant to say, but also out of respect, I'm not going to try to spam you guys with too much information or to make shit up for likes. So thanks, everybody. We've appreciated all the comments and support. We've appreciated the robust online dialogue, and we've appreciated all the celebrations of the lives that we lost. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon.